Hey people, it's me again. So, anyways, um, I heard about this sort of thing on here, and as far as that goes, the whole uh, Gen Z stare, as far as that goes, that has become viral lately because of the millennials, as far as that goes. But it's one of the things I had talked about periodically on my channel about the difference of generations and all that. Because technically, I'm considered to be like early millennial or late Gen Xer as far as that goes. You know, because I was born in '81, and that was kind of a bit of a transitional year at that point because it was like the first year that Ronald Reagan was president, as far as that goes, and there was a lot of systemic changes that was going on, you know, when it came to that. So that is one of those little things there. And so the other thing that I want to mention here was I don't know if it's on here on YouTube, but I probably have to do like a real deep search into it, because there was a sort of report on ABC News back in the day. It was on 2020 or one of those shows, and it was about like the different generations at the workplace at that point. And this was probably back about 30 or 35 years ago, and that was when the Gen Xers were starting to make their way into the workforce at that point. And so at one point they had three different people that represented each generation at that point at the time. And so the 2020 anchor, you know, Hugh Downs, represented like the silent generation as far as how their work ethic and overall experience and all of that. And then they had another guy, I forgot his name, but he represented the baby boom generation, and he was kind of like someone that was kind of like mid-management, and was like the go-between as far as when it came to, you know, the editorial staff and something of that sort. And then they had another guy who represented the Gen Xers, and back at that time when they were just starting out, and so it was just the usual things that the beginning reporters and interns that they had at ABC News at the time, and where they just worked the fax machines, the teletypes, and all that, and do their little research and all that sort of stuff. You know what I mean? So, I mean, the reason I talked about this, it's just interesting how times had like changed at that point, because there were certain things that the Gen Xers had done throughout their entire career that changed things just as much as the baby boomers, just as much as the silent generation, greatest generation, but also like my generation, the millennials, had been in the past, you know, and now Gen Z is the one that's like has basically entered the workforce and all that, and now it's like my generation, the millennials, are kind of like in, you know, mid-management kind of thing of that sort. And in a way, I mean, if I was like in like a job city, that probably would be like mid-management, you know, but it also depends on like what would be my overall role as far as managing people, you know, as far as that goes. But for me, it's like since I read about all these stories on Reddit about bosses from hell and all that, and so I would be the type of boss that wouldn't really try to change anything, you know, other than just make things more efficient. but without causing any other problems of that sort. Yeah. But that was kind of like the thing there. So, considering all of that, I think there's a lot of other things that I have to kind of mention, overall, and not just, the workforce setting, but also politics downstream at that point. I mean, now that there's like the end of the woke ideology of that sort, but I was also saying that since the beginning that there's like the whole end of woke thing for quite a bit, but it was just that it was only a matter of time before people say that we don't really care about your pronouns and blah blah blah, that sort. But it was just simply like how in the 90s there was that whole PC culture kind of thing that was prominent in the mid to late 90s of that sort. But it was right around the time, I think, when Clinton was president, and how in some ways it gotten overboard with the PC police, or whatever you would call it back then. Because I even remember in such shows like Duckman was making fun of like the PC police, and then even like in this one of those sketch comedy shows, I think it was called The State. It was one of my brother's favorite shows back then, and I talked about it before, where it was like this one woman who was going to be a model for the drawing class. Of course she was going to be naked, and then so one of the characters was a guy that was in drag, pretending to be a woman of like one of those third wave feminists of all of that, and then doing the usual spiel about all of this, and it then managed to convince nearly all the class to walk out of a protest, and leaving the only like maybe 2 or 3 guys that were there that just wanted to oogle the model, and that was it. And so that was just one of the whole stories at that point there. But it reminded me of it reminded me of Ally McBeal in like one of the other episodes where Ally and her friends were in a sculpture class, and then they had these men out there like being the model, being the male models at that point, where they had to do that. And there was supposed to be like a scene where I think it was like Elaine had accidentally dropped something, and and it was like, maybe it was like the penis of the statue that she was trying the sculpture that she was trying to sculpt at that point. But then it reminds me of that movie, what was it called again? Heartbreakers? Yeah, and that was the one where it had Sigourney Weaver and Jennifer Love Hewitt, and there was a scene where they were gonna put in the statue, and it was one of those naked male statues, and then the penis broke off in the door frame. And I remember when we were watching it at the local Edwards cinema, and one of the teachers, his name was Noel, had whispered to us that it's so funny. It was so funny as far as that goes, but it just feels weird that was like early in 01, like that. So, anyways, I guess that's part of it. So, talk to you guys later.